In the heart of a bustling city, nestled between towering skyscrapers and high-end cafes, stood an upscale boutique known for its luxurious designer collections. The store was a favorite haunt of the wealthy elite, where people came not just to shop but to be seen. On this particular afternoon, the boutique was alive with the soft hum of conversation and the gentle rustle of silk dresses being examined. Among the shoppers was Victoria Sterling, a name that carried weight in social circles. Known for her impeccable fashion sense and larger-than-life personality, Victoria was the epitome of privilege. Her presence commanded attention wherever she went, and today was no exception. Victoria moved through the store with practiced ease, her stiletto heels clicking against the polished marble floor. She paused briefly at a display of handbags, each one more extravagant than the last. Her fingers brushed lightly over the leather, her lips curling into a satisfied smile as she imagined how perfectly one of these pieces would complement her upcoming gala outfit. But just as she was about to call over a sales assistant, her attention was drawn to another figure in the store, a woman who seemed entirely out of place. Standing near a rack of dresses was Clara Bennett. Unlike Victoria, Clara's appearance was understated. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, her hair tied back in a neat ponytail. There was nothing flashy about her, but there was a quiet elegance in the way she carried herself. Clara had stepped into the boutique to find a gift for her niece's birthday, hoping to surprise her with something special. She wasn't accustomed to shopping in such high-end stores, but she had heard good things about the quality of their products and decided to give it a try. As Clara flipped through the garments, her eyes lit up at the sight of a beautifully embroidered dress. It was delicate, tasteful, and unlike anything she owned. She reached out to touch the fabric, marveling at its softness. But before she could fully appreciate the craftsmanship, she felt a pair of sharp eyes boring into her. Turning slightly, she noticed Victoria watching her with thinly veiled disdain. For a moment, their gazes locked, and Clara instinctively smiled, hoping to diffuse any tension. However, Victoria's expression remained cold and unyielding. It didn't take long for Victoria to make her feelings known. With an air of superiority, she approached Clara, her voice cutting through the quiet atmosphere of the boutique like a knife. "Excuse me," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, "but I must ask, are you lost?" Clara blinked, taken aback by the question. Before she could respond, Victoria continued, her words growing sharper with every second. "This is a luxury store, darling. If you're looking for bargain deals or something more modest, I suggest you try somewhere else." The other shoppers paused what they were doing, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. Some exchanged glances, while others pretended not to notice, though it was clear everyone was listening intently. Clara felt a flush of embarrassment creep up her neck, but she refused to let it show. Instead, she met Victoria's gaze steadily and replied in a calm voice, "I'm here to shop just like anyone else. Is there a problem?" Victoria raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by Clara's composure. "A problem? Well, let's just say your presence here is rather distracting. This is a space for discerning customers, not amateurs." The word hung in the air, heavy with judgment. Clara clenched her fists briefly, resisting the urge to retaliate. She knew better than to stoop to Victoria's level, but the unfairness of the situation stung. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was simply trying to enjoy her time in the store like everyone else. The sales assistants, who had been hovering nearby, shifted uncomfortably. They were used to dealing with difficult customers, but this was a new level of tension. One of them, a young woman named Mia, shot Clara a sympathetic look. Though she couldn't intervene directly without risking her job, Mia silently admired Clara's restraint. In contrast, Victoria seemed to thrive on the chaos she was creating, relishing the attention she was receiving from the other shoppers. As Clara considered her next move, she reminded herself of why she had come to the boutique in the first place. She wasn't here to prove anything to anyone, not to Victoria, not to the gawking onlookers. Her focus was on finding a meaningful gift for her niece, and no amount of rudeness was going to deter her from that goal. Still, the encounter left a bitter taste in her mouth. It wasn't the first time someone had judged her based on appearances. but it never failed to disappoint her. People often assumed that because she didn't flaunt her wealth or dress in designer labels, she didn't belong in places like this. What they didn't realize was that Clara's simplicity was a choice, not a limitation. Unbeknownst to everyone in the store, fate was about to take an unexpected turn. Just as Clara prepared to walk away and put the unpleasant exchange behind her, the sound of the door opening caught everyone's attention. A tall, impeccably dressed man entered the boutique, his presence commanding immediate respect. His suit was tailored to perfection, and his confident stride suggested he was a man who was used to being in charge. As he scanned the room, his eyes landed on Clara, and a warm smile spread across his face. Little did Victoria know, her actions had set off a chain of events that would soon reveal just how wrong her assumptions had been. And as the newcomer approached Clara, it became clear that this seemingly ordinary shopping trip was about to become anything but. Clara stood frozen for a moment, her thoughts swirling like leaves caught in a breeze. She had always prided herself on maintaining her composure, no matter the situation. But Victoria's words had struck a nerve, digging into insecurities she thought she had long buried. The way Victoria had sneered at her, dismissing her as though she were invisible, it wasn't just rude, it was dehumanizing. Clara could feel the weight of the other shoppers' stares, their curiosity mingling with discomfort. Yet, despite the sting of humiliation, she refused to let Victoria see her crack. Taking a deep breath, Clara straightened her posture and looked directly at Victoria, her voice steady but firm. "I'm sorry if my presence bothers you," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But I'm here to shop just like everyone else. If there's an issue with that, maybe you should take it up with the store manager." Her tone carried a quiet authority, one that surprised even herself. She didn't raise her voice or resort to anger. Instead, she spoke with dignity, refusing to be intimidated. Victoria, however, was not used to being challenged, especially by someone she considered beneath her. Her lips curled into a smirk, and she tilted her head slightly as though amused by Clara's attempt to stand her ground. "Oh, darling," she drawled, her voice dripping with mockery. "You really don't belong here. Trust me, this isn't the place for modesty." The emphasis she placed on the word made it sound almost like an insult, and several people nearby shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension rising. Clara felt a flicker of frustration but pushed it aside. She reminded herself that engaging further would only give Victoria more ammunition. Instead, she forced a small smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, and said simply, "Thank you for your opinion. I'll be going now." With that, she turned away, heading toward the exit. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the unfairness of the encounter. She hadn't done anything wrong, she was just trying to find a gift, but Victoria had made her feel as though she didn't deserve to be there. As Clara moved past the racks of designer clothing, one of the sales assistants, Mia, stepped forward, hesitantly. She had been watching the exchange unfold, torn between her duty to remain neutral and her growing admiration for Clara's restraint. Now, seeing Clara heading for the door, Mia couldn't stay silent any longer. "Excuse me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of the boutique. Clara paused and glanced back, meeting Mia's kind eyes. "You didn't deserve that," Mia continued, her words filled with genuine sympathy. "Don't let anyone make you feel small. You have every right to be here." Clara blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected kindness. For a moment, she considered brushing it off, pretending she was fine, but something about Mia's sincerity made her pause. "Thank you," she murmured softly, offering a small, grateful smile before continuing toward the exit. Meanwhile, Victoria watched Clara leave with a self-satisfied smirk. She turned to the nearest sales assistant, expecting praise for having handled the situation. "Honestly," she said, her voice carrying just enough volume for others to hear, "some people just don't know their place. It's exhausting." The assistant nodded politely, though her expression remained neutral. Inside, she felt a pang of irritation. Victoria might have wealth and influence, but her behavior left much to be desired. The atmosphere in the boutique had shifted noticeably since the confrontation began. What had started as a peaceful afternoon of browsing had turned into a tense spectacle, leaving both customers and staff uneasy. Some shoppers exchanged glances, whispering quietly among themselves. Others pretended not to notice, focusing intently on the items in front of them. But regardless of how they chose to react, it was clear that Victoria's actions had left an impression, and not a positive one. Just as Clara reached the glass doors of the boutique, a new figure entered, causing a ripple of surprise among those inside. He was tall and impeccably dressed, his presence commanding immediate attention. His suit was tailored to perfection, and his confident stride suggested he was a man accustomed to being in control. As he scanned the room, his gaze landed on Clara and his expression softened. Without hesitation, he walked toward her, his movements purposeful yet unhurried. For Clara, the sight of him was both comforting and unexpected. Alexander Bennett, her husband, rarely accompanied her on shopping trips, preferring to focus on work or other commitments. But today, fate had intervened, bringing him to the boutique at precisely the right moment. When he reached her side, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice low, but filled with concern. Clara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. She didn't want to cause a scene or embarrass Alexander, but the truth was written all over her face. Sensing her unease, Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly, his attention shifting to the crowd behind her. He noticed the lingering tension, the curious glances, and most notably, Victoria standing nearby with a smug expression. Though he didn't yet know the details, he could read the situation well enough to understand that something was amiss. One of the braver sales assistants, emboldened by Alexander's arrival, approached cautiously. "Sir," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "there was an incident earlier. A misunderstanding, perhaps. Your wife was asked to leave by another customer, though she hadn't done anything wrong." The words spilled out quickly, as if the assistant feared being interrupted. Alexander listened intently, his expression unreadable but undeniably intimidating. Victoria, who had initially dismissed the newcomer as irrelevant, suddenly realized who he was. Recognition dawned on her face, followed swiftly by panic. Alexander Bennett wasn't just any wealthy businessman. He was one of the most powerful figures in the industry, with connections that spanned continents. His name was synonymous with success, integrity, and influence. And now he was standing here, clearly concerned about what had happened to his wife. For the first time since the confrontation began, Victoria found herself at a loss for words. Gone was her air of superiority, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, unsure of how to proceed. The tables had turned and she was no longer in control. All eyes were on Alexander now, waiting to see what he would do next. As Clara stood beside her husband, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had handled the situation with grace, refusing to let Victoria's rudeness shake her confidence. But now, with Alexander by her side, she knew she wasn't alone. Together they represented strength, resilience, and mutual respect, the very qualities that had drawn them together in the first place. What would happen next was anyone's guess, but one thing was certain: the dynamics in the boutique were about to change dramatically. And for Victoria Sterling, the consequences of her actions were only beginning to unfold. Alexander's arrival had shifted the energy in the boutique entirely. The air, which moments ago had been thick with tension and whispered judgments, now buzzed with a different kind of anticipation. His commanding presence was impossible to ignore, and everyone, shoppers, sales assistants, even Victoria herself, found their attention drawn to him. He stood beside Clara, his hand still resting lightly on her shoulder, a silent but unmistakable gesture of support. Though his expression remained calm, there was an intensity in his eyes that suggested he was fully aware of what had transpired. Clara glanced up at Alexander, her heart swelling with gratitude for his timing. She didn't want to make a scene, or draw further attention to herself, but she also couldn't deny the relief she felt knowing he was there. "It's fine," she said softly, trying to downplay the situation. "I was just leaving." Her voice carried no hint of bitterness, only a quiet resignation. She didn't want to burden him with the details, especially not in front of an audience. But Alexander wasn't about to let it go so easily. He had seen the flicker of hurt in Clara's eyes before she masked it, and that alone was enough to ignite a protective instinct within him. Turning his gaze toward the crowd, he addressed the assistant who had spoken earlier. "What exactly happened here?" he asked, his tone measured but firm. It wasn't a demand, but it left no room for evasion. The assistant hesitated, glancing nervously at Victoria, who was standing nearby. She looked as though she wanted to shrink into the background, though her usual arrogance made it difficult to disappear completely. Finally, the assistant took a deep breath and recounted the events as diplomatically as possible. "There was a disagreement between your wife and another customer. She was accused of not belonging here and told to leave, but she hadn't done anything wrong. It was all very unnecessary." As the assistant spoke, Alexander's jaw tightened ever so slightly. His eyes moved to Victoria, who was now visibly uncomfortable under his scrutiny. Up until this point, she had always relied on her wealth and social status to shield her from consequences. People like her rarely faced accountability, and she had grown accustomed to getting her way without question. But something about Alexander's demeanor suggested this wouldn't be one of those times. Victoria, realizing she couldn't avoid the situation any longer, stepped forward haltingly. Her confidence, once unshakable, now wavered. "Mr. Bennett," she began, her voice higher pitched than usual. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. I simply thought—" "You thought what?" Alexander interrupted, his voice cutting through her words like a blade. Though his tone remained calm, there was an edge to it that silenced Victoria mid-sentence. For the first time in her life, she found herself struggling to form coherent thoughts. All the rehearsed phrases and excuses she normally used to justify her behavior seemed hollow in the face of his piercing gaze. I thought the store catered to a certain clientele," she stammered, gesturing vaguely toward the racks of designer clothing. "And I believed it would be better if—" Her voice trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. Even to her own ears, her reasoning sounded absurd. She glanced around the room, hoping someone might come to her defense. But the other shoppers were studiously avoiding eye contact. The sales assistants, too, remained silent, unwilling to take sides but clearly uneasy. Alexander studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, in a voice that carried just enough authority to command absolute attention, he said, "Let me get this straight. You decided, based solely on appearances, that my wife didn't belong here? That because she doesn't flaunt her wealth or dress in designer labels, she somehow isn't worthy of shopping in this store?" Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She had walked into this boutique assuming she was untouchable, that her opinions carried more weight than anyone else's. But now, confronted by a man whose influence far exceeded her own, she realized how misplaced her assumptions had been. Worse still, she could feel the weight of judgment from the others in the room, their disapproval palpable. Clara, sensing the growing discomfort, placed a gentle hand on Alexander's arm. "It's okay," she murmured, hoping to diffuse the situation. She didn't want to see anyone humiliated, not even Victoria. But Alexander shook his head slightly, signaling that this wasn't over yet. Turning back to Victoria, he continued, his voice steady but laced with quiet disdain. "You know, Mrs. Sterling, it's fascinating how people like you operate. You judge others based on superficial things, their clothes, their cars, their bank accounts, as though those things define a person's worth. But true character has nothing to do with material possessions. It's about how you treat others, especially those you perceive as weaker or less fortunate." Victoria flinched at his words, though she tried to mask it with a brittle smile. "Surely we can agree to disagree," she said weakly, attempting to salvage whatever scraps of dignity she had left. "I meant no harm." "No harm?" Alexander repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Telling someone they don't belong, making Them feel small and unworthy, that's harm. And for what? To satisfy your own ego? To assert dominance over someone you deemed inferior? That's not leadership, that's cruelty. The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. Victoria's face flushed crimson, her embarrassment evident. She glanced around desperately, searching for a way to escape, but there was none. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how this would play out. Finally, unable to endure the scrutiny any longer, Victoria mumbled something about needing to leave and hurried toward the exit. Her departure was swift and undignified, a stark contrast to the confident entrance she had made earlier. As the glass doors swung shut behind her, the tension in the boutique began to dissipate, replaced by a collective sense of relief. Alexander turned to Clara, his expression softening immediately. "Are you all right?" he asked again, his concern genuine. Clara nodded, offering him a small smile. "I'm fine," she assured him. "Honestly, I've dealt with worse. But thank you for being here, for standing up for me." He pulled her into a brief embrace, his arms wrapping around her protectively. "You never have to face things like this alone," he said firmly. "Not while I'm around." The sales assistants, who had been holding their breath throughout the confrontation, finally exhaled. One of them approached tentatively, holding the embroidered dress Clara had admired earlier. "Ma'am," she said shy, 先前的部分似乎未完全发送成功。以下是完整的第三部分扩展内容的结尾段落。The sales assistants, who had been holding their breath throughout the confrontation, finally exhaled. One of them approached tentatively, holding the embroidered dress Clara had admired earlier. "Ma'am," she said shyly, "we'd be honored if you'd accept this as a gift from the store. It's the least we can do after everything that happened." Clara blinked in surprise, shaking her head gently. "That's incredibly kind of you, but I couldn't possibly—" "Please," the assistant insisted, her tone sincere. "It's our way of apologizing for not stepping in sooner. You deserve to be treated with respect here, and we're sorry you weren't." For a moment, Clara hesitated, then glanced at Alexander, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Thank you," she said finally, accepting the dress with a warm smile. "That means a lot." As they prepared to leave the boutique, the atmosphere had transformed entirely. What had begun as a tense and unpleasant encounter had ended with a quiet triumph. Not just for Clara, but for everyone who had witnessed the exchange. The staff seemed lighter, their earlier discomfort replaced by admiration for Clara's grace under pressure and Alexander's unwavering support. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual energy, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded within the boutique's walls. As they walked away, hand in hand, Clara felt a renewed sense of peace. She knew that incidents like this would always happen. People would judge, assumptions would be made. But she also knew she had something far more valuable than wealth or status: integrity, resilience, and a partner who stood by her side no matter what. Behind them, whispers circulated among the boutique staff about the day's events. Some expressed relief that Victoria's behavior had finally been called out, while others marveled at the quiet strength Clara had shown. Whatever the case, one thing was certain: the story of the modest lady and her billionaire husband would be talked about for weeks to come, a reminder that kindness and humility often carry more weight than money or power ever could. As Clara and Alexander stepped out of the boutique, the cool breeze of the city greeted them, a stark contrast to the heated tension they had just left behind. Clara clutched the beautifully wrapped box containing the embroidered dress, her fingers brushing lightly against the ribbon. Despite the gift and the resolution inside, she couldn't shake the lingering unease that came with being judged so harshly. But Alexander's steady presence beside her was a comforting anchor, grounding her in the moment. "You handled that beautifully," Alexander said softly, breaking the silence as they walked along the bustling street. His voice carried admiration, but also a hint of protectiveness. "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner." Clara glanced up at him, her lips curving into a small smile. "You can't always be there to fight my battles," she replied gently. "Besides, it's not the first time someone has made assumptions about me based on how I look or what I wear," It's frustrating, but I've learned to let it roll off my back. Alexander frowned slightly, his brow furrowing. That doesn't make it right. People shouldn't have to get used to being treated poorly. No one should feel like they don't belong because of someone else's arrogance. His words were firm, reflecting the deep sense of justice that defined him. He paused for a moment, then added, "Still, I'm proud of how you handled yourself in there. You didn't stoop to her level even when she tried to provoke you." Clara nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes walking away is the hardest thing to do, but it's often the best choice. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me upset, and honestly, I think she would have loved nothing more than a scene. Alexander chuckled dryly. She certainly thrives on drama, doesn't she? But today, she picked the wrong person to mess with. The comment brought a genuine laugh from Clara, lightening the mood between them. For a moment, the weight of the afternoon seemed to lift. They continued walking, weaving through the crowd of shoppers and tourists, until Alexander stopped abruptly. Turning to face Clara, he asked, "Do you mind if we go somewhere quieter? I'd like to talk about this and about something else." Curious but trusting, Clara agreed. They found a small cafe tucked away on a side street, its warm lighting and cozy interior, a welcome retreat from the chaos of the city. The barista greeted them with a friendly smile as they ordered their drinks, a cappuccino for Clara and an espresso for Alexander, and settled into a corner booth by the window. Once they were seated, Alexander leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his tone serious. "Something that might explain why Victoria acted the way she did." Clara tilted her head, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Alexander hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Victoria Sterling isn't just some random socialite. She's part of a circle of people who thrive on gossip and status. They're obsessed with appearances, wealth, and power, and they'll do anything to maintain their image. From what I've heard, she's been trying to get closer to certain business circles, including mine." Clara's eyes widened slightly. "You think she was targeting you?" "Not directly," Alexander clarified. "But she knows who I am, or at least she knows my name carries influence. By making a spectacle of herself in places like that boutique, she's hoping to stay relevant. Unfortunately, that means stepping on others to boost her own ego." Clara absorbed this information quietly, her expression thoughtful. "So she wasn't just rude to me because of how I dressed. It was calculated, to draw attention to herself." "Exactly," Alexander confirmed. "And that's why I wanted to step in. Not just because she insulted you, but because behavior like that needs to be called out. If people like her are allowed to act without consequences, they'll keep doing it, hurting others in the process." Clara reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Thank you for standing up for me," she said sincerely, "but I hope you didn't cause too much trouble for yourself. People like Victoria don't take criticism well." Alexander smiled faintly, squeezing her hand. "Don't worry about me, I've dealt with worse. Besides, I have a little leverage in situations like this." At Clara's questioning look, he elaborated. "I happen to own shares in several luxury brands, including the boutique we were just in. It's not something I advertise, but it gives me a certain authority when it comes to setting standards for customer behavior." Clara's mouth dropped open in surprise. "You own part of that store?" "Indirectly, yes," Alexander admitted. "It's a long story involving mergers and investments, but the point is, I have a say in how those businesses operate. When I told Victoria her patronage was no longer welcome, I meant it. And trust me, word will spread quickly among her peers." Clara shook her head, amazed by the revelation. "I had no idea. Does that mean you could have shut down the entire situation earlier?" "I could have," Alexander acknowledged. "But I wanted to hear your side of things first. You're the one who matters most to me, not the drama or the gossip. Besides, I think it's important for people to see that actions have consequences, even for someone like Victoria." The conversation shifted as their drinks arrived, steam rising from the cups. Clara took a sip of her cappuccino, savoring the rich flavor before speaking again. Do you think she'll try to retaliate somehow? People like her don't usually take losses gracefully. Alexander shrugged, unconcerned. If she does, it won't matter. Her reputation is already fragile. Today's incident will only reinforce the image she's been fighting so hard to avoid. Someone who's petty, entitled, and out of touch. Once word gets out about what happened and how she was humiliated, it'll be difficult for her to recover. Clara frowned slightly, feeling a pang of sympathy despite everything. It's sad in a way. She seems so consumed by the need to prove herself, to everyone, all the time. It must be exhausting. It is, Alexander agreed. But it's not our responsibility to fix her. All we can do is live authentically and treat others with kindness. That's something money can't buy. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the world pass by outside the cafe window. Cars honked in the distance. Pedestrians hurried along the sidewalk, and the hum of conversation filled the air. For Clara, the encounter at the boutique felt like a distant memory now, overshadowed by the warmth of Alexander's support and the clarity of their discussion. Eventually, Clara broke the silence with a soft laugh. You know, I came here today just to find a gift for Emma's birthday. I never expected to walk away with a new perspective and a beautiful dress. Alexander grinned, his eyes twinkling. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Sometimes the smallest moments turn into something much bigger. Clara nodded, her gaze softening as she looked at him. I'm glad you were there, not because I needed rescuing, but because it reminded me how lucky I am to have you. And I'm lucky to have you, Alexander replied, his voice filled with sincerity. You remind me every day that true wealth isn't about what you own. It's about who you are and how you treat others. As they finished their drinks and prepared to leave the cafe, Clara felt a renewed sense of gratitude. The events of the day had tested her patience and resilience, but they had also reinforced the values she held dear. With Alexander by her side, she knew she could face whatever challenges lay ahead, not with arrogance or entitlement, but with grace, humility, and unwavering strength. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the evening sky, casting a golden glow over the streets. Together they walked hand in hand, ready to embrace whatever the future held, with love, dignity, and a quiet confidence that no amount of judgment could ever diminish. The next morning, the city awoke to its usual rhythm. Cars honking, coffee shops bustling, and newspapers hitting doorsteps. But within certain circles, whispers of the previous day's events at the boutique were already swirling like leaves caught in a breeze. News traveled fast among the wealthy elite, especially when it involved someone as prominent as Alexander Bennett. By mid-morning, stories about Victoria Sterling's public humiliation had spread far beyond the boutique's walls, reaching gossip, blogs, social media feeds, and private text chains. Victoria herself was acutely aware of the chatter. She sat in her penthouse apartment staring blankly at her phone as notifications poured in. Each message carried a new variation of the same story, how she had insulted Clara, only to be confronted by none other than Alexander Bennett himself. At first, she tried to dismiss it as exaggeration. Surely people wouldn't believe everything. They read online, but as screenshots of eyewitness accounts began circulating, denial became impossible. The truth was out there, undeniable and unflattering. Her frustration boiled over when she opened an email from one of her closest acquaintances, a fellow socialite named Penelope. Did you really tell Alexander Bennett's wife to leave that store? The message read, People are saying he basically banned you from all his brands. Is this true? Victoria clenched her jaw, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, as she debated how to respond. Denying it outright would make her look defensive, admitting it felt unbearable. In the end, she settled for a vague reply. It's more complicated than it seems. Let's talk later. But Penelope wasn't alone in her curiosity. Over the course of the day, Victoria received calls and texts from nearly everyone in her inner circle. Some offered awkward condolences while others feigned ignorance, clearly fishing for details. A few even seemed gleeful, their sympathy masking thinly veiled delight at seeing her stumble. For someone who prided herself on being untouchable, The sudden loss of control was devastating. Meanwhile, life went on as usual for Clara and Alexander. They started their day with a quiet breakfast at home, discussing plans for the upcoming weekend and laughing over shared memories. Clara had tucked the embroidered dress safely away in her closet, intending to surprise her niece Emma with it during their family dinner the following evening. Though the boutique incident lingered in the back of her mind, she refused to let it overshadow her happiness. If anything, the experience had deepened her appreciation for the simple joys in life, the warmth of family, the comfort of friendship, and the unwavering support of a loving partner. Still, Clara couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt whenever she thought about Victoria. While she didn't condone the woman's behavior, she understood what it was like to feel insecure and judged. She knew Victoria's actions stemmed from a place of fear of losing relevance, fear of not measuring up, fear of being exposed as less than perfect. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. And though Clara had no intention of defending Victoria, she hoped the woman might learn something from the experience. By late afternoon, the gossip had reached its peak. One tabloid published a detailed account of the confrontation, complete with quotes from anonymous sources claiming to have witnessed the entire scene. Another outlet ran a feature titled, "When Wealth Meets Humility, The Tale of Two Women," contrasting Clara's quiet dignity with Victoria's explosive arrogance. Social media platforms lit up with hashtags like "Your Modest Lady Wins" and "Billionaire Husband Steps In," turning the incident into a viral sensation. For Alexander, the attention was nothing new. As a billionaire businessman, he was accustomed to headlines and scrutiny. But this time, the focus wasn't solely on him. It was on Clara, too. He made sure to monitor the coverage closely, ensuring that none of it painted her in a negative light. When reporters began speculating about their personal lives, he issued a brief statement through his PR team. "We appreciate the public's interest, but we ask that our privacy be respected. This is a private matter between two individuals, and we hope it remains as such." Despite his efforts, the story continued to dominate conversations across the city. Friends and colleagues approached him throughout the day, eager to share their thoughts or ask for clarification. Most praised his handling of the situation, calling it a masterclass in standing up for what's right. Others expressed sympathy for Victoria, though their tone often betrayed a hint of schadenfreude. Alexander listened politely to each perspective, maintaining his composure even when opinions clashed with his own. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the skyline, Clara and Alexander decided to take a walk through the park. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. Streetlights flickered on one by one, illuminating winding paths lined with benches and flower beds. Couples strolled hand in hand. Children laughed as they chased after dogs, and joggers moved steadily along the trails. It was a peaceful contrast to the chaos of the past 24 hours. As they wandered side by side, Clara finally broke the silence. "Do you think Victoria will be okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "I mean, I don't agree with what she did, but I can't imagine how hard it must be to face all that backlash." Alexander considered her words carefully, before responding. "I think she'll survive," he said evenly. "People like her are resilient. They know how to bounce back from setbacks. But whether she learns anything from this, that's up to her." Clara nodded slowly, understanding his point. "I guess I just hope she realizes that kindness costs nothing. Treating others with respect doesn't diminish your status. It enhances it. Maybe this will give her a chance to reflect. If anyone can inspire reflection, it's you," Alexander replied, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "Your grace, under pressure, spoke volumes yesterday. You didn't retaliate, didn't seek revenge, you simply stayed true to yourself. That's powerful." A soft blush crept into Clara's cheeks at his praise. "I didn't do anything special," she protested lightly. "I just acted the way I always try to act, with compassion and patience." "And that's exactly why I admire you so much," Alexander said, his tone filled with sincerity. In a world where so many people prioritize wealth and status, you remind me what truly matters. Love, humility, integrity, those are the things that define us. They stopped walking then, standing beneath the glow of a lamppost. Around them, the park buzzed with life, yet they felt cocooned in their own little bubble. Clara looked up at Alexander, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she murmured, "for everything, for standing by me, for reminding me of my worth, for showing me every day what real partnership looks like." "You don't need to thank me," Alexander said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Being with you is its own reward. You've taught me as much as I've taught you, if not more." Their moment was interrupted by the distant sound of laughter, a group of teenagers playing frisbee nearby. Smiling, Clara turned her gaze toward them, watching as they darted across the grass, their joy infectious. For a brief second she imagined what it must feel like to live without pretense, without the weight of expectations pressing down on your shoulders. Then she glanced at Alexander and realized she already had that freedom. With him she could be herself completely. As they resumed their walk, the conversation shifted to lighter topics: upcoming travel plans, favorite childhood memories, and the dessert menu at their go-to restaurant. By the time they returned home, the stresses of the day had faded, replaced by a sense of contentment that only comes from knowing you're loved and supported. Back at the boutique, the staff gathered for their end-of-day meeting, reflecting on the whirlwind of events. Mia, the assistant who had defended Clara, recounted the story once again, her admiration for Clara growing with each retelling. "She didn't deserve any of that," Mia said firmly, "and Mr. Bennett handled it perfectly. It's rare to see someone use their influence for good like that." Her colleagues nodded in agreement, their respect for Clara and Alexander evident. "Maybe this will change things around here," one of them suggested. "If people realize they can't treat others poorly without consequences, maybe we'll start seeing more kindness." As the meeting wrapped up, the manager stepped forward, addressing the team. "Let's remember this as a lesson, not just about customer service, but about humanity. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of how they look or what they wear. If we can embody that spirit, we'll create a space where everyone feels welcome." The staff dispersed, heading home to their families and friends, their minds buzzing with thoughts of the day's drama. Meanwhile, miles away, Victoria sat alone in her penthouse, scrolling through endless updates about herself. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened window, and for the first time in years she found herself questioning the image she had worked so hard to project. Was it worth it? Had she gone too far? Only time would tell if the incident would lead to growth or further division. But for now, the ripple effects of that single afternoon continued to spread, touching lives in ways both big and small. And as Clara and Alexander prepared for bed, holding hands beneath the covers, they knew one thing for certain. They had faced adversity together and emerged stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them with the same. The days that followed the boutique incident brought a mix of calm and reflection for Clara and Alexander, while ripples of the event continued to spread throughout the city. For Clara, life returned to its usual rhythm. Quiet mornings spent, sipping tea, afternoons filled with errands or volunteering at local charities, and evenings unwinding with Alexander over shared meals. Yet, the memory of Victoria's words lingered in her mind, not as a source of bitterness, but as a reminder of how easily people could be swayed by appearances. It wasn't just about her. It was about society's tendency to judge others based on superficial traits, often without taking the time to understand who they truly were. Alexander, too, found himself reflecting on the encounter. Though he had dealt firmly with Victoria, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for her. Her behavior had stemmed from insecurity, a desperate need to maintain control in a world where she felt constantly judged. While he didn't excuse what she had done, he recognized that her actions were symptoms of a deeper issue, one that affected far more people than just her. "It's easy to point fingers," he told Clara one evening, "but real change happens when we address the root causes of such behavior. Clara nodded thoughtfully, stirring her cup of chamomile tea. I think you're right, she said softly. People like Victoria aren't born thinking this way, they learn it. Maybe if someone had shown her kindness instead of judgment earlier in life, things might have been different. Her words stayed with Alexander long after their conversation ended. He began to consider ways he could use his influence to promote values of empathy and inclusivity, both within his businesses and in the broader community. Over the next few weeks, he initiated discussions with his team about implementing programs that encouraged ethical practices and fostered environments where everyone felt respected. Success isn't measured by profit alone, he emphasized during one meeting. It's also about creating spaces where dignity is prioritized. Meanwhile, the story of the modest lady and the billionaire husband became a topic of fascination beyond the elite circles of the city. Local newspapers ran features highlighting Clara's poise and Alexander's integrity, framing them as examples of grace under pressure. Social media users debated whether Victoria's treatment was justified, with many praising Clara's restraint and Alexander's intervention. Some even went so far as to dub Clara a symbol of quiet strength, sharing memes and quotes inspired by her response to the situation. For Clara, the attention was unexpected but humbling. She received messages from strangers thanking her for inspiring them to stand firm in their own convictions, no matter how others perceived them. One woman wrote, "Your calmness gave me courage. I've always been afraid to speak up when people judged me, but now I realize my worth isn't defined by their opinions." Another added, "You reminded me that true elegance comes from within." Though touched by these messages, Clara remained grounded. She knew the spotlight wasn't something she sought, nor did she want to dwell on negativity. Instead, she focused on spreading positivity in her own small way. During her volunteer work at a local shelter, she shared stories of resilience with those facing hardships, encouraging them to embrace their inner strength. "We all have moments where we feel small," she told a young woman struggling with self-doubt. "But remember, your value doesn't depend on anyone else's approval." As for Victoria, the fallout from the incident proved challenging. Once a fixture at high-profile events, she suddenly found herself uninvited from galas and charity functions. Friends who once fawned over her now avoided her calls, fearing association with her tarnished reputation. Even her favorite stores began treating her differently, their staff exchanging knowing glances whenever she walked in. The weight of public opinion pressed heavily on her shoulders, forcing her to confront the consequences of her actions. "Addie?" First, Victoria tried to brush it off, telling herself that trends shifted quickly and people would forget soon enough. But as weeks turned into months, the isolation gnawed at her. Late at night, she sat alone in her penthouse, scrolling through old photos of glamorous parties and extravagant vacations. These images, once symbols of success, now felt hollow. She realized that despite her wealth and status, she lacked something essential, genuine connection. One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, Victoria picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years, her sister's. They hadn't spoken since a falling out over an inheritance dispute, but Victoria hoped her sibling might still be willing to listen. To her surprise, her sister answered, her voice cautious but warm. "Victoria, is that you?" "Yes," Victoria replied, her voice trembling slightly. I wanted to apologize for everything. I know I haven't been the best person, and I'm starting to see why." There was a pause on the other end of the line before her sister responded. "Apologies are a start, but actions matter more. Are you ready to change?" "I think so," Victoria admitted. "I don't want to keep living like this, always chasing validation, always feeling empty. I want to be better." Her sister sighed, then said gently, "Then let's take it, one step at a time. You're not alone in this, Victoria. Let me help you." That conversation marked the beginning of Victoria's journey toward self-awareness. Slowly, she began reaching out to others she had wronged, offering heartfelt apologies and making amends where possible. It wasn't easy. Many rejected her attempts outright, but a few accepted, seeing her vulnerability as a sign of growth. Over time, she started attending therapy sessions, working through the insecurities that had driven her behavior for so long. Though the road ahead was uncertain, she felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to rebuild her life on firmer ground. Back. In Clara and Alexander's world, life continued to flourish. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, rooted in mutual respect and shared values. Together, they celebrated milestones big and small, from Emma's delighted reaction to the embroidered dress, "It's perfect," to Alexander's successful launch of a new initiative aimed at empowering underprivileged entrepreneurs. Each achievement reinforced their belief that true fulfillment came not from material wealth, but from meaningful contributions to the world around them. 1. Crisp autumn afternoon. As golden leaves danced in the breeze, Clara and Alexander took a leisurely stroll through the park. Hand in hand, they reflected on the past year, the challenges they'd faced, the lessons they'd learned, and the love that sustained them through it all. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't gone to that boutique?" Clara asked playfully. Alexander chuckled, squeezing her hand. "I think fate has a funny way of bringing us exactly where we need to be. Whether it's a boutique, a cafe, or a park bench, our paths always lead us to growth. Together." Clara smiled, leaning into him as they walked. "You're right. And no matter what happens, I know we'll face it side by side." As they disappeared into the crowd, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the bustling city, it was clear that their story wasn't just about one moment of triumph. It was about resilience, compassion, and the enduring power of love. A world often clouded by judgment and division, they stood as a testament to the beauty of authenticity and the profound impact of choosing kindness, even in the face of adversity.